Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to congratulate the Leader of the Official Opposition on his excellent remarks on this bill this morning. Although the government will use its majority, Mr. Speaker, to pass this bill, really there is nothing to celebrate here today when it comes to Bill 100. There are some people who say that lawmaking is a lot like sausage making. Well, Mr. Speaker, this bill shows that this bill makes sausage making look like prime rib making, Mr. Speaker, because of the mess that we've all gone through to get to this point. I guess it's a good thing that the government buckled under the pressure of the business community, the small business community, and the options that we had on the opposition side to get them to pay attention to what they were saying. But really there is nothing to celebrate because it was a very bad and flawed process that gets us to this point. Many will ask, as they look at the process that got to today, Mr. Speaker, for Bill 100, why was it done this way? Perhaps we will never know why it was done this way, Mr. Speaker, but I think for once, finally, we're seeing the true colours of the government when it comes to issues of the Trade Union Act and of labour relations generally. For example, Mr. Speaker, the government attempted to present this bill to this House as a housekeeping matter, a mere housekeeping bill. And yet, when opposition was raised to it, if it was just a housekeeping bill, you think it would be no big deal to listen to the concerns of others. Be no big deal if it was just a housekeeping matter to let it sit for further consultation, as was the request of the opposition. But no, the government showed its true colours because on the one hand they called it a housekeeping measure, but on the other hand they were equally and ferociously determined to ram it through at all costs. And that's why today, on the eve of the closing of this session, that the government remains committed, so strongly and obviously committed to passing something that they themselves called a mere housekeeping measure. That doesn't make sense, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we'll always wonder, why was the government so determined? I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, as the newest member of the House, as someone who is the most recent on the campaign trail, someone who's a proud member of the class of 2010, along with others who have consulted directly with the people this year, that I can tell you, I've been wondering as we debate Bill 100, as I'm sure other members are wondering, as they think about Bill 100 and their own experience, and our own experience in 2010 on the campaign trail. Which electors in your district came up to you and said, you know what I really want you to do when you get to the House of Assembly? I want you to legislate successor rights for unions, for government unions. This is a burning issue. I can tell you in Cumberland South, that didn't happen once. I don't know about the other members, but it didn't happen once. I can tell you in Cumberland South, no one came up to me and said, you know what I really want you to do when you get to the House of Assembly? I want you to form a committee, a special committee, but I don't want you to include everybody on this committee. I want you to make sure that it's only unions and unionized employers on the committee, but I do want that committee to have broad powers to review all the labour legislation of the province. That did not happen to me once in Cumberland South. I can't speak for other members of the class of 2010, but we can imagine whether they faced those demands from their own constituents. And so I think, Mr. Speaker, as I look at Bill 100 at this point, why are we spending all this time on these issues that no one has asked us, no one up front has asked us to deal with? Why am I spending time on this when my own voters did not raise it? But then it occurred to me that there is actually a connection, because people are worried about something important, Mr. Speaker, and that is jobs and our economy, the fragile state of our economy, the need to attract new investment to our province, the need to keep companies that are already here, and that we have had over the past 2 decades one thing going for us. As we scan the world for new investment, for new companies, for new jobs, whether it's in Cumberland South or any other constituency in Nova Scotia. We've had one thing going for us, and that is we have struck the right balance in the past between Labour and management, who work out their differences under the laws as they exist today, at least before today, as they work through their differences in a period of relative peace and calm and fairness and balance that all the world can see, that all those people that make decisions about where they're going to set up their factories or their companies can see when they think of Nova Scotia. That we send NSBI and others around the world to extol the virtues of Nova Scotia as a place to invest. That they have this one thing going for us. But now that has been put at risk. That is actually why it matters in Cumberland South. That is actually why it matters to the opposition. That is actually why it matters to the business community of Nova Scotia and to others, because they know that beyond the tactics that the government employed to try and ram through some of these specific provisions without consultation, that there is a deeper and more important meaning, and that is the ability of our province to create meaningful work and to attract companies to our shores. That is what that group on the government side wanted to put at risk to satisfy some other interest that remains unseen and hidden and behind the scenes. So, fortunately, Mr. Speaker, as a result of the combined efforts of the opposition, and more importantly as a result of the uproar caused by our small businesses and their employer groups, the government, I hope and pray, has at least learned some important lessons from this experience. First of all, that when you claim to do a consultation in advance of introducing a bill, that it should not just include your friends, that it should be true consultation of all those that would be involved in the implementation of the bill, all those that will be affected by it, all those who have an interest in a bill such as this, and open and honest and complete consultation, not just on parts of the government's plan. Had that happened in the first place, perhaps a lot of this mess could have been avoided. I hope the government has also learned that there is virtue in being honest as to your intent when you introduce a bill into the legislature. The word disingenuous was thrown around this House in recent times, Mr. Speaker, but I think it's clear who was the disingenuous one in this case. When you circulate a discussion paper, that doesn't talk about the entire bill, when you claim consultation that leaves out important individuals and companies in our province, when you have a title for a bill that doesn't truly describe the bill, you can only ask, who is the disingenuous one in that case, Mr. Speaker? And I think that the answer is clear. And so I hope that the government is learning an important lesson. Now, the criticism from the government side, Mr. Speaker, was very telling. The Premier himself once accused the opposition of putting the worst possible interpretation on the bill. Well, Mr. Speaker, ignoring our philosophical differences on what the government is trying to do, I'll at least say this. If we agree on one thing, that this bill is open to interpretation, that it is open to wide and varying interpretation, then it is a bad bill. And when it is a bad bill, when it is open to that much varying interpretation, then the right thing to do, a path the government still refuses to take, the right thing to do is to go back to the drawing board, to withdraw the bill, to write up a better bill where the government is honest and makes its intentions clear and has the guts to bring that bill, an honest and clear bill, to the legislature for all to see. But that is not what is happening today, and that is why today is no day to celebrate. So I will say, Mr. Speaker, that with regard to the amendments that were made today, that all they accomplish is to limit the damage that the government is going to do to the labour management and investment climate of our province. That's all that those amendments accomplish, is to limit the damage. Now, good for the small business community for standing up and putting pressure on the government to finally, at the last minute, at least listen to some of their concerns. Good for them. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? They're not feeling very good today because they have been put through an awful, horrible, disrespectful process that they patiently worked their way through to get to this point. They may be glad those amendments are accepted, but they know it's still a bad bill. It still contains provisions that they were never asked about, that they were never consulted on, and that they don't agree with. And that's why, although good for them for bringing their concerns forward, I know they're not feeling very good today about the process, the sausage-making process that the government has put them through. And for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, as I stand in my place, I say that after all that has been done, including the amendments, the fact remains that the bill still contains serious, sweeping provisions around successor rights and around the Labour Management Review Committee and others that didn't go through proper consultation, that were buried in the details of the original bill. Those provisions are still there, that no one had a chance to look at prior to the introduction of the bill, and only at the last minute were amendments allowed that only accomplish the minor goal of limiting the damage. But those provisions are still in the bill. And for that reason, because the process was so flawed, because those provisions are still there, although they're limited, this bill does not deserve to pass. The government needs to get a strong message that this is no way to do business, and for that reason, although we're glad the amendments are in place to limit the damage, the bill doesn't deserve to pass, and we will be voting no on third reading.
I recognize the member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in my place today to speak on Bill 100. It's been a rather frustrating time for a number of us who were trying to figure out what this bill meant. Members, a researcher for our party did attend the technical briefing on this bill when it was announced. I attended the announcement of the bill over in the Red Room, and we had some concerns. But because this bill was big and because it had a lot of clauses that had referred to other bills and things like that, we referred it off to lawyers for their interpretation of what this bill meant. And it took a while for the lawyers to get through that. So we had already come through second reading, which tells you how quick this was. By the Wednesday, I believe, following the announcement of the bill, we were through second reading, and you have to ask yourself, what was the rush? From the beginning, we've had some concerns around the issue of consultation. We were told in that original announcement that there had been consultation. It took several days before we found out that consultation was not a full consultation, and the much heralded consultation was in fact consultation about the merger of the various boards. No one had talked to the business community about successor rights, about a preamble, about a Labour Management Committee, none of that. And it took the government quite a long time to actually come to the realization that they might actually have to listen to the business community. It took a filibuster. It took the business community going out en masse to express their displeasure with this bill, to get the government to slow down and put the brakes on and actually put in a few amendments. And again, I keep saying, what was the rush? Well, along the way, we heard that the Premier had made a promise, and so he was going to fulfill that promise. We didn't know who he'd made the promise to. It turned out it was during Labour negotiations. But somehow, Nova Scotians didn't know about that promise during the election. This was a different kind of promise. This was a promise that he had made during Labour negotiations. You know, last Sunday, I went to church, and I was surprised by the number of people who mentioned this bill to me. We may not have had business leaders out with placards ringing this province house, but I'll tell you, people knew this was going on. And they probably weren't out there ringing province house with placards because they were earning a living and they were running a business and they couldn't do that. But they did what they could do, which was they sent emails and they sent letters and they let us know how deeply unhappy they were with this. The opposition parties listened. It took far longer for the government to respond. And in fact, we were treated to the very disrespectful way that the Premier actually referred to business in this province, saying that they were being disingenuous for expressing their very concerns. And that expressing those concerns was in fact myth-making. And Mr. Speaker, I was quite frankly shocked by the Premier's tone and by the lack of recognition of their very legitimate concerns around this bill. If you cannot tell what a bill means, then you have a problem. In the end, we did get some changes. And the government finally agreed to enshrine, for example, the exact meaning of successor rights. But let's be clear, this is a deeply flawed bill, but it will go forward. In the end, business and the investment community will have taken away a certain impression about this government, because they listened to what the government said, both in words and in legislation. And they know that the government wasn't concerned about them because they would have consulted with them in the first place. And they would have listened to them when they raised concerns. It took a filibuster. It took a full-on media, full-court press to get the government's attention. And Mr. Speaker, make no mistake, this bill is going to pass today. We're not happy about that. But it's a deeply flawed bill, and it was a deeply flawed process. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable member. I'll now recognize the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's unfortunate we have to speak about this bill. I'm probably the only member sitting in this House that was in manufacturing and exporting and doing all the things that you want a Nova Scotia business to do and generate employment in this province. And I can tell you, as a former business owner, entrepreneur, I'm terrified of this bill, absolutely terrified. And anybody I've talked to in the business community shares my concern and deeply shares the concern. Unfortunately, most people that haven't run a business don't understand how busy a person is that does run a business. It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job, and honestly, most of the time, until I was really elected to the legislature, I didn't have time to listen to what was going on in the legislature. Unless it was something that I had to attend to immediately, I just didn't have time to do it. And if I took the time to do it, it meant something else in my business suffered. So when you look at this bill, I view it, and after reading the bill several times, listening to what the labor lawyers have said and everything else, it looks like the government's trying to fulfill a promise to the unions, and I don't think there's anything wrong with unions. I really do not. I think they've served a very good purpose in the province and still do today, but it's not appropriate for all industry and all businesses. The issue is here, I think that this bill is at the first move to unionizing the province. Now, if all small businesses, a lot of small businesses, if they're unionized, simply wouldn't work. It's just that simple. If you look at the economics of it, and straight numbers, and straight cost and effective cost, you'll see that it just won't work. No matter how you put it out there, it won't work. So I know the government is pushing this thing through, as promises they've made, And I want to recall, too, during the election campaign where in my riding, my small little riding in Preston, I had a very good candidate run against me for the NDP, a very honorable lady and a lady whom I respect greatly. But one of my campaign team was out with me one day and ran into two people he didn't know, and he pretty well knows everybody in the community. And he asked them, "Where are you from?" "Toronto." "Oh, how come you're here in Preston from Toronto?" "Well, we're working on this campaign." "Where are you staying?" "At a local hotel." Very interesting. Now, unfortunately, we didn't have funds to get people to move in from Toronto, and it was two people, only three people, the candidate and these two other people, running around doing this. So who paid for it was the question. I still don't have the answer to that question today. But it's a scary possibility. It could have been somebody that maybe down the road wanted to receive something in return, and maybe this is part of something in return. I have no idea. Hopefully not, but that could be the case. And I heard that same story over and over in all the ridings in the province, and you know, that is not positive. But when you really look at this bill, if it's going to be as devastating as industry thinks it's going to be, and I've talked to everybody I've talked to, bear none, think this is a very poor bill, and it's going to be a long-term negative effect on the economic growth in Nova Scotia. The Minister of Economic Development, the Premier, and the Minister of Finance are always saying how great a job we're doing. I understand now our unemployment rate's over 10%, over 8,000 jobs lost, and this can't continue. And if anything is to change, to upset that delicate balance in this province, there's going to be unemployment figures well over 10%, and they'll be sustained over 10%. That means that families will either be moving out of the province to earn a living, which they are now, or they'll just give up. They'll absolutely give up. And that means our welfare lines will be longer. That means our unemployment insurance will be exhausted as people can't find jobs any longer. So this bill, I think, is a very negative bill for Nova Scotia. It's going to create a huge bureaucracy. The chair of these boards that's going to be in place is going to be another big empire. Somebody that has a tremendous amount of power in the province. And as you go through the bill and look at the different clauses, there's a lot of clauses in there that are going to be very negative to employers. We've got to help employers in this province and make sure that they want to stay here in Nova Scotia. A lot of these employers can go anywhere. They can absolutely go any place and work and live and run their businesses. But a lot of them choose to stay here because of the wonderful climate we have here, wonderful people we have here, the really good workforce we have here. And despite the overburdening taxes we have and the overburdening regulations, they suffer through. But you put one more strike against them, one more thing that overloads the pendulum and puts them the other direction, that they can't make money and they can't continue to operate here, they will leave. They will close shop. They will leave. We've seen Moyer's Candy Factory over here pack up and go to Mexico. Pack up and go to Mexico. Now, those really well-paid jobs from people that didn't have to have a university education, a lot of them from my community, that are suffering today because that business left. High taxes, all kinds of activities here that cost so much more to operate here than it does in Mexico. Well, there's no reason that a lot of other companies won't pack up and do the same, or just even go south of the border where the tax rates are lower. And you don't have the implications that this bill will probably create a lot of unions in this province that businesses will just shut down. I've heard lots of stories from Ontario, business people I know in Ontario, and they just moved across the border into the U.S. And the economy there has never recovered since the NDP government has been in, it was in Ontario many years ago. So I hope we're not headed in the same direction here. I'm not convinced that we aren't. I'm not convinced that we aren't. I'm afraid to think of what kind of bills are coming next in the spring to support more union activity in the province. And I do stress again, unions are very, very, very important to our province. They are very important. They've made a tremendous amount of change in labor laws that really need to be changed. And you read the books on Glace Bay when the Army come in and set machine guns up in the street to stop people from having the rights to make a reasonable living and safe working conditions. Those conditions, I believe, today are gone. I believe our Department of Labor does a great job ensuring that that employers are fair to employees and they have a balance on the system and as safe as workplace as they can possibly manage under the Act they have. I would have preferred to see the government come forward with stronger labour bills to make sure that people are safe in the workplace and we have less workers' compensation claims. And that does make a company more competitive if they do have good working employees and employees that aren't injured on the job. So there's so many things that go into this, and I'm not sure that anybody in the NDP has ever run a business. I'm not sure that they have, that's sitting over there today, that had to worry about making a payroll, had to worry about going and exporting products outside of the country, and see how difficult it is when you have to export, and your competitors in Europe, it's in the US, it's in China, and see just how quickly and how small a part of the market you can get if you're lucky enough to get any of it. You know, if you don't understand these things and how they work, how can you make rules that are going to affect them? And I'm afraid that the rules under this Act 100, is really going to turn Nova Scotia into retirement cottage country. Only people are going to be able to afford to stay here, the people are retiring. And as our population gets older, we're going to see more and more people retire, and you're going to see their families move to Ontario and out west and to other countries, indeed, to work. And I think this bill is going to aid that happening, which is going to be very negative to our province. And I'm very afraid what's going to happen to this bill. And personally, I'm going to vote against the bill. Thank you.
I'm going to recognize the honourable member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to rise today and have an introduction. In the East Gallery, I have my parents who are here, and they're here to listen to the wonderful debate. So if the members would give them a warm round of applause, please.
The third reading on Bill 100, is the question being called? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. Nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 100, an act to establish a unified labour board.
Order that this bill do pass. Order the title be read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. I'll recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 99, the Conflict of Interest Act?
Bill number 99, the Conflict of Interest Act. Move third reading of Bill 99.
Yep.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise and say a few words on Bill number 99, the Conflict of Interest Act. Mr. Speaker, you'll recall I stood in my place on second reading to highlight a number of concerns in the way that the Act was being presented. Speaker, as I mentioned then, as I say now, this is presented as a reactionary bill by the government to give the impression that changes have been made, that there was obvious conflicts that existed that have to be addressed. Speaker, we know that that is not the case. This bill is more of a window dressing than anything else. Might as well call it for what it is. But regardless of that, Mr. Speaker, when it was first presented, one of the aspects of it was that the Conflict of Interest Commissioner would be required to post the forms filled out by members online. When the draft legislation was brought to our attention, to our caucus's attention, I was asked to review it. I think my I had to look around there because I think my baby has a toy at home that makes noise like that. So I wasn't sure where I was at there for a moment. If I was back home or still here in the House of Assembly, but Speaker, at the time, as I was saying, when the draft legislation was brought forward, the way it was presented was that everything would be posted online when members are required to fill in their disclosure forms. Now, as you know, Speaker, members are required to fill in 2 forms. One which would list any sort of assets that they have as required to disclose if it meets a certain criteria, but as well another form to be filled on behalf of your spouse and dependent children. I was pleased that before the bill was tabled in this House, the government did make a change to try to ensure that the information related to spouses and dependent children would not be posted online. But when we looked at it closer, it still wasn't enough because of the fact that the form that we fill out as members requires us to give our home address and our home phone number. So I was pleased that through the law amendments process, we were able to get changes in that information will no longer be required to be posted online. It will still be provided to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, who at the end of the day is the individual who will be able to check and as well ensure that there is no conflict by the member, but that will remain as private information, which it should. And I don't think any Nova Scotian expects us to be giving that type of information to be posted online that anyone can take and use as they wish. More importantly, abuse that information as they wish. So I want to recognize that that important change was made. As well, if I'm not mistaken, during the Committee of the Whole House process yesterday, another amendment was brought forward by the government in that one of the clauses in the bill which talks about the powers of the Conflict of Interest Commissioner talks about his ability that if he finds a complaint made to him or her, whoever the commissioner might be, is frivolous and vexatious, that he had the ability to award both costs and damages. Now, the problem I had with that, Mr. Speaker, is that if the Conflict of Interest Commissioner sees a complaint, one shouldn't have to go very far into the process before making a determination if something is frivolous and vexatious, because it's a very strict standard to be able to meet that test. It has to be pretty much out there to be considered frivolous and vexatious. So my question was, what costs would someone incur defending themselves against a complaint that clearly met the test of being frivolous and vexatious? I would submit to you there should be no cost, because the commissioner should be able to dismiss that up front if it's that obvious that it meets the test of being frivolous and vexatious. But what was even more troubling for me is that the Conflict of Interest Commissioner was given the powers to award damages. Now, what type of damages was my question? And exactly what would that mean? And once again, in this bill, they're not defined. And it's not defined in the regulations that were presented to us. In fact, when we did ask for the regulations, the only thing that was given to us is basically the forms that we currently fill out. That was it. There was nothing else. There was no more definitions. There was no more indication of how this bill was to be interpreted. So my understanding is that yesterday, last night, in fact, during the Committee of the Whole House, the government did introduce another amendment to remove the word damages from that clause in the Conflict of Interest Act. So the Commissioner would still be given the opportunity to award costs. I would suggest that I can't see where a claim that would be determined to be frivolous and vexatious would actually attract costs on behalf of the party who's being accused of being in conflict. But regardless, at least that remains. But the word damages have been taken out, which I was pleased to see. One of the other concerns which I had, Mr. Speaker, is that under the old rules, any member of the House of Assembly who is to receive a gift or personal benefit in excess, with a value in excess of $250 is required to declare that to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. And those are the rules that I've been operating under since I was first elected. Now, the government has seen fit to add a new clause that puts a ban on receiving any gifts or personal benefit by a member or a minister in the performance of their duties. Now, the question I had, Mr. Speaker, is what's the definition of gift? What's the definition of a personal benefit? Nova Scotians are a generous people, and when they have a good deed done for them, it's not uncommon that they will want to reward that good deed. And we see that throughout our province. And people of very modest means are usually some of the most kindest that you're going to find, that will come to your office and drop off something they've knitted, or they'll drop off something they've baked. And the thought that this bill would now require us to say, I'm sorry, dear, but we can't accept that because that'd be in a conflict of interest is ridiculous. And I don't think anyone ever intended that to be the consequence. But when you don't define what a gift is, who is going to make that determination? So now it would appear that the government House leaders indicated there will be a definition in the regulations. Well, it would have been nice to have seen that up front, because after what we've been through as elected members, the last thing we want is any gray area. That someone will come afterwards and say, no, 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 you misunderstood, and here's what this really meant, and you're in conflict in what you did. Mr. Speaker, the requirement still remains that if you receive anything in excess of $250, you have to declare it. So the last thing I would want to see, Mr. Speaker, is that any member of this House, myself or anyone else, would be accused of being in conflict for accepting what one would determine to be basic hospitality and generosity from the people that we serve. I would be embarrassed to have to tell someone, I can't accept your baked good because I'm in a conflict of interest under the new NDP rules. You know, Mr. Speaker, I don't think anyone ever intended that. Another clause goes on to say that if you're receiving a gift as part of an official function, then it's okay, as long as it's under the $250. So again, that's not defined. And the last thing we want to see is gray area, that members aren't clear as to what the rules are. So there is still opportunity there through the regulations, and I would hope that the government will share those regulations with us. One of my other concerns is that there's no implementation date for this bill. This is a government, especially the Minister of Finance, who spent so much time in opposition criticizing previous governments for not putting a proclamation date in legislation. Yet here's another example of a bill which affects each and every member of this House, yet it is the NDP cabinet that will decide when the bill will be proclaimed. There's no need for that. No need at all. But that's what this government has decided is the appropriate way to proceed, to allow them to have the ability to do this, not all members of the House. The other concern which I raised, Mr. Speaker, was the fact that we now, in this legislation, there are clauses that basically say if a judge of the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia finds that a member has violated the conflict of interest, that judge can remove the member from the House of Assembly. The judge can declare a seat vacant. The Supreme Court judge can also determine if a minister has violated the code of conduct to remove the minister from cabinet. Now, as soon as I saw that, Mr. Speaker, to me it was a clear violation of the British system that we find ourselves under as far as the divisions of the judicial, the executive, and the legislative branches of government. It made absolutely no sense to me to allow an appointed judge to be able to remove a duly elected member from this chamber, regardless of what they had done. The role to remove a member should remain with the House of Assembly. The role to remove a cabinet minister must remain with the Premier. The Premier appoints people to cabinet under the British parliamentary system. It must be him to remove, him or her, to remove a minister from cabinet. The answer that came back, and I do want to commend my colleague from Dartmouth East who raised a very clever argument here in this House by looking at the rules of this House, claiming that this in essence was an amendment to the Constitution. And in reality he was correct, it is. But the argument that came back from government in doing some research was that these are clauses that were first put into legislation, I believe, around the 1990s. So what the government was basically doing was just taking clauses in previous legislation that already existed. So it's unfortunate that we would not have been here, myself and the member from Dartmouth East, back in the 90s when this was first done, where we could have raised the fact that this was actually contrary to the Constitution and to the division of powers. So we did miss that opportunity. If I'm not mistaken, both the member for Dartmouth East and myself in the early 90s were still in university, so we were not. It was right around the border between high school and university, but so we weren't here then. But there was still an opportunity for the government to remove those clauses, and my argument was, remove the clause of giving the judge the ability to do so, and instead amend the House of Assembly Act to say if a member violates the Conflict of Interest Act, that they would be ejected from the House of Assembly. That is for this House to do. When former member for Inverness, Billy Joe McLean, was found guilty of expense-related issues, it is not the court that removed him from this House. It is the House of Assembly that passed legislation amending the House of Assembly Act to remove him as a member. That is our role here. Because Nova Scotians have sent us, we've been duly elected to hold our position. And the only place that should be able to remove a member is this duly elected House. And what saddened me, and still saddens me, is when some of the comments that were made and that were relayed to me of, well, we don't think it's the proper environment to give the House of Assembly powers over the future of its members. It saddened me, and I was ashamed. Not ashamed personally, but ashamed for those members that they would even say that. Mr. Speaker, I'm not embarrassed to be a member of the House of Assembly. I stand here as a servant to the people of Richmond County, duly elected in free elections, that people were able to vote freely, and they had a choice every single time. And I'm proud to be able to stand in this institution. And we are not flawless. And I said from day one, if the people of Richmond County were looking for someone who was flawless, don't vote for me. I was not flawless then, and I'm not flawless now. And I don't think anyone in this chamber presents themselves as being that way. And we will make mistakes. And members will do things that they will regret. That is the nature of being human. But for us to turn around and say, because of certain events, that we should allow others to determine the fate of a duly elected member, Mr. Speaker, that's not the way our system was set up. The thought that a judge could remove a cabinet minister that the Premier has appointed makes no sense at all. Because one just has to ask, what Premier in their right mind would keep a minister in cabinet that's in court being accused of having violated the Conflict of Interest Act? I can't think of any, regardless of their political stripe, that would put themselves through that. But regardless, under the British parliamentary system, it's still ultimately the Premier that must be able to determine who stays in cabinet and who doesn't. For example, if we were to remove that, the backbenchers on the government side could get together and decide, we don't like a particular minister, we're going to remove the minister. And we're going to appoint one of ourselves as minister instead. Now, no one would expect that to make any sense under the British parliamentary system. But where are we going that we're now transferring over to an appointed judge the ability to remove a duly elected member? So again, I say, there was an opportunity here to have the same effect, but to respect the British parliamentary system we work under by amending the House of Assembly Act and giving this legislature the ability to remove a member if that member should have violated the Conflict of Interest Act. And I do hope, Mr. Speaker, that that's never the case, that we don't find ourselves in that situation, that any member would be forced out of their seat, or any minister would be forced out of cabinet due to a conflict. I would not wish that upon anyone. But again, if we're not going to stand up for this institution, who is? And if the government doesn't feel the need to defend the institution that we have, then who is? Mr. Speaker, we're the ones who have the privilege of standing here, the 52 of us, having been duly elected. We have a province that has approximately 990,000 citizens, and only 52 of us get to stand in this chamber. Now, I haven't done the math on that, but that's not a very big percentage. If you look through history of how many have had the chance of serving, it's still a very small percentage of the population. Yet, this is an example, this bill, where I fear it basically tells Nova Scotians, on election day, we tell them during the campaign, trust us, vote for us, we will do well by you. And then this bill basically says the minute we get to the House of Assembly, don't trust us anymore, and put the powers in the hands of others to determine the fate of the members of this institution. I find that extremely unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, and I do hope at one point that this government will finally stand and say, we support the institution that we have. It is not perfect. We can't think of a better one, and we'll continue to work towards improvements. But By the end of the day, the supremacy of the legislature must be respected. This government has taken a number of steps to remove that supremacy. This bill is another step towards doing that. I find that extremely unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, not only for us, but for those who will follow in our footsteps. If this place is not to remain as a supreme body when it comes to legislation, when it comes to our laws, when it comes to as members duly elected, I think we're going down a very dangerous path. And unless we're looking at completely overhauling the system of democracy we have in this province, then we must stand behind the system that we have and look to strengthen it at every opportunity. Mr. Speaker, there is still some opportunity for the government through regulations and through other means of being able to make changes to the Conflict of Interest Act to strengthen it. As I said on second reading, allow me to say again, the changes in the thresholds of what you need to declare, of what assets need to be listed, allow me to say loud and clear, has zero impact on the member for Richmond, or on my spouse, or on any dependent child. And I'm not sure if there's any member in this House that will be actually affected by it. So let me make sure no one misconstrues my comments as a means of trying to hide something that's in this bill that will have a negative impact on me. It is not the case. Not at all. But from a procedural standpoint, from someone who has studied political science, who has studied history, who has admired this chamber and is very proud to stand as a member in it, this bill sends the wrong messages in some of the authority it is granting outside of this chamber. It's unnecessary, and it's unfortunate that due to certain events that this government does not believe that we should stand behind and fully respect the supremacy of the House of Assembly. Speaker, I'm sure we will have other opportunities as we move forward in other sessions to debate such matters, and I'm certainly looking forward to a significant change in attitude from this NDP government when it comes to matters affecting the membership of the men and women who have the privilege of serving in this chamber. Merci.
Thank you, honourable member. Any other speakers on Bill 99? Question's been called. All those in favour indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 99, an act to avoid conflict of interest by members of the House of Assembly, members of the Executive Council, and public employees.
Order this bill be carried. Order bill is read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you please call Bill number 63, the Legal Profession Act?
Bill number 63, the Legal Profession Act.
I move third reading of Bill 63, Mr. Speaker.
Third reading has been moved. Are you ready for the question? Question's been called. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 63, an act to amend Chapter 28 of the Acts of 2004, the Legal Profession Act.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 105, the Education Act? I move third reading.
Bill number 105, the Education Act. Third reading has been called. The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise in my place and make some comments with regard to Bill 105. Bill 105, an act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act, and in that in particular, one clause that I will speak to, Mr. Speaker, and that is authorizing the Minister of Education to provide an instructional leadership program for teachers and grant diplomas for the successful completion of the program. Sounds like a good idea. And Mr. Speaker, my issue with this is it's been a good idea for the last 20 years. It's been in place for the last 20 years. And my question is, why the need to put it in a piece of legislation? those people who have been involved in education over those last 20 years are well aware of the consortium, and I'm hoping the minister, if she's not been informed by staff at the department, will become familiar with the consortium. Yes, smiling about it I think is important, because I think it is important to everyone in this province in education to recognize that the good things that have happened through partnerships with the Nova Scotia Teachers Union, with the Department of Education, with the school board, the School Administrators Association, with the Nova Scotia School Boards Association, and with the Association of Nova Scotia Educational Administrators, all partners who came to the table, Mr. Speaker, and who agreed that it was important that there would be instructional leadership programs for teachers who wanted to be administrators and for administrators who wanted to learn more. And so those partners came together, joint funding, and put together programs that did provide the strength and the support that educational administrators and leaders in our systems needed. And so that happened without any legislation to say that the minister had the authority to do that. That happened because there were groups of education partners who recognized the importance, who put their dollars where they should be, and who came together with programs that would provide that. And so it is certainly a meaningless piece of legislation to have that included. And I just want to make sure that the minister does understand that it is redundant to try to have a legislation that speaks to something that already exists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, honourable member. I'll now recognize the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to echo the remarks of the honourable member who just preceded me. This does not need to be in legislation, and this is yet another one of those bills where we are seeing that issues of housekeeping, and I'm not even sure you can call this housekeeping because it just simply did not need to be done, has been brought before this House, maybe to get the numbers up, we're not quite sure, but this already exists in this province, and so we're not quite sure why it came forward at this time in this particular way. But anyway, it's great that educators can become more educated about administration, but this is just. Yes, not that we'll have that many administrators left after 22% cut in education, but anyway, with that said, I think I will resume my seat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, honourable member. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I did want to rise in my place today and just point out that you know, during my teaching career, there were opportunities for anybody in the profession to engage in leadership training. I know as far back as 20 to 25 years ago, picking up a copy of the monthly NSTU paper and seeing the leadership courses that would be offered during the summer months. And especially for those that were considering administration, there was actually a block of administration courses that could be taken. And also there was the week-long seminar for teachers who were looking at administration or who were going into department head roles or doing an interim period of administration. There were those opportunities, and teachers and administrators took part in those. And I am not sure at the end of the day if a diploma or some kind of certification was actually given, because I did administration at the university level. But I know that you know, this has been long available to the teaching profession. So it's again one of those bills that has come before the legislation that I'm not sure will make an iota of difference in the life of a teacher and school administrator. but it's one that's there, and maybe it's one that perhaps we can take a look at and do something perhaps to inspire young teachers to look at the role of leadership in our school system. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I take my place.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further speakers on Bill 105? The question's been called. All those in favour indicate by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 105, an act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act.
Order that the bill do pass. Order the title be read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. I'll now recognize the Honourable Minister of Education on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Minister of Labour and Workforce Development, I would like to take this opportunity to recognize 3 very dedicated staff in the East Gallery. We have Marjorie Davison, who is Executive Director of Policy and Professional Services, Kim Kennedy, Director of Policy and Planning, and my assistant, Margie McDonald. And I wonder if they might stand and be recognized for their incredibly good and long work, hard work, on behalf of the members of this House.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 119, the Residential Tenancies Act? I move third reading.
Bill number 119, the Residential Tenancies Act. Third reading. I'll recognize the Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a bill that our caucus will not be supporting. There are some clauses in this bill, I think, that go too far in the direction against the landlord, and there's some clauses that don't go far enough in the direction of the tenant. So when you look at the bill, I don't think it's a bill that's really going to accomplish what I hope that the minister hoped that it would do. And I would think that this bill will be back here probably within a year or 2 years for some major amendments to it. When landlords finally say that we're not going to rent our facilities anymore, we'll sell them. I've already talked to many landlords that said they're going to do that prior to this bill coming forward. And on the other hand, we must make sure that we have tenants that are protected. I have a trailer court in my riding that is a continuous problem with the owner of the trailer court. Imposing some pretty strict covenants on the people in the community. Some of them are justified and some of them aren't, and continually looking for major rent increases. So I think it has to be a balance. I don't think this act strikes that balance. Unfortunately, I wished it would have, because I do think that the act needs to be changed and need to be changed in a major way. Unfortunately, this act isn't it. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, this is one of those bills that, you know, we've heard lots of opposition to it. There's some questionable clauses within it, especially as it revolves around the immediate tenure. There's still some landlords that aren't too sure whether it gives them the tools that they need in order to protect their properties, I guess is how you would put it. But Mr. Speaker, you know, as it is here in third reading, you know, we know it will get passed and put into law. And I know a lot of times that we get phone calls as MLAs, so I guess we'll have to hold judgment on whether it'll be effective or not, depending on the phone calls that we'll be getting as MLAs. But I do agree a fair amount with the previous speaker that I'm sure we'll be back at it at some other point, making some changes to this bill. But at this point, we'll be seeing it on to the next stage of its life. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize the Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just very briefly, I just wanted to follow up on from the Honourable Member from Preston on this and just say that, you know, I think as he suggested, it's not that we're against the entire bill. There are obviously some things that we think are positive improvements, and I know that 2 amendments we had. One was we felt very strongly that the domestic violence piece should be included in this bill. I understand that the government, I will recognize the fact that the government has indicated an interest to bring that forward at a later date. But it remains our feeling that it would have been better to hold this bill at this time until that could be included and worked out among the department. I know that they had some challenges around the legal wording, but we think that that was extremely important, especially since the department, especially in light of the optics of the fact that the government released a report last week on domestic violence and that very, very important issue, and this was one of the recommendations from the government. The second issue, and the member from Preston, for Preston, spoke very eloquently on this, was the issue of around the tenure. And while I do understand that there are concerns, I do understand where the department's coming from on reducing it to 0 tenure. I still feel quite strongly that it's better placed at 1 to 2 years, because actually I think that not only is the member for Preston correct in saying that we'll be back here because of landlords' concerns, I think we're going to be back here because of tenants' concerns in many respects, because there appears to be a way around this for many landlords, in that you will now have these very cumbersome and very long leases with a very long list of rules for tenancy, just so that the landlord can ensure that they're covered if they need to evict somebody. And that, you may find that we have tenants with just really cumbersome leases, and find that we end up having as many complaints from tenants in the end on this as landlords. So, Mr. Speaker, it's just not in a position where we can support it at this time. As I say, we would have very much preferred to have seen this held until the spring session, so that some of the issues could be resolved. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Question's been called on the third reading of Bill number 119. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. Nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 119, an act to amend Chapter 401 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Residential Tenancies Act.
Order that this bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. I'll now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you please call Bill number 88, the Summary Proceedings Act, and I move third reading.
Bill number 88, the Summary Proceedings Act. Third reading has been called. The question's been called. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The bill is carried.
Bill number 88, an act to amend Chapter 450 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Summary Proceedings Act.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Speaker. Could I please call third reading on Bill number 121, the Human Organ and Tissue Donation Act? I move third reading.
Third reading on Bill number 121. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity at second reading to say comments, but I had the opportunity to hear a number of comments from members on all sides of the legislature. I had the opportunity a few years ago under the former Minister of Justice, now member for Cape Breton North, along with the Premier, who was then the Leader of the Opposition, to travel down to the Miami-Dade forensic facility. At the time, our province was looking at whether the adequacy of what we had here for forensic science, as well as morgue, and we had an opportunity to talk about organ donation and tissue donation. And what was interesting is that in Miami-Dade, and I believe in the state of Florida, there's an automatic assumption of tissue donation when it comes to eyes. So they do not need consent to be able to remove the eyes from a deceased individual if they are suitable for transplant. And I found that very interesting that they would have picked that and that there was that automatic assumption. But what was interesting as well is that at the actual morgue, they had a group, a team that was designated to call families as soon as they were aware that someone was deceased, whether it be through a car crash or a sudden death, to immediately request, are you prepared to allow the deceased to be an organ donor? And what was interesting there as well, and we even got to see a part of a couple of autopsies that were taking place there. And, you know, we see it on TV sometimes, but it's a whole other thing when you're in a room seeing it being done. But it was interesting to see and to hear them describe of, you know, we often think of the major organs and the role that those can play in saving other people's lives, but there's as well the skin, the tissue, the muscle. There's so many other parts as well that can be harvested and that can be used in transplants to help others. And so it's important that that message be out there, because I know when you do get your health card now, it does ask you if you wish to be an organ donor. It gives you different options to check off. And often people only think of the major organs, but there's much more that can be donated as well, which I'm sure the Minister of Health is well aware of. And I think it's many of the colleagues have indicated whatever we can do towards education and making people aware of that. I know for me it was an education of hearing what skin and muscle tissue and even bones in some cases can be, what they can be used for in transplants and in helping others. What was interesting, Mr. Speaker, is that the chief medical officer was explaining to us why Miami-Dade had one of the highest organ donations anywhere in North America. And naturally, we were puzzled. Why would it be that this one area would have such high donations? And we were traveling from one area to the next, and just as we were traveling, a Harley-Davidson went by at high speed, and the driver was going by without a helmet. And the chief medical examiner told us it's because of guys like him that we have a very high donation rate here in Miami-Dade. He said, we don't have a helmet law. And he said, it's amazing how many deaths are caused or severe injuries that someone's in a coma and just is not going to recover. And he indicated the day that they implement a helmet law, they'll see a dramatic decrease in the amount of organ donations in their area. So I found that most interesting. And Mr. Speaker, I heard other members, my colleague from Kings West, for example, speak of a constituent of his who had double lung transplant, and members will recall the late Marilyn McKay, who I had the opportunity to raise her issue on a number of occasions. I know my colleague from Kings West made reference, but obviously that was another case of an individual having to wait over a year, almost 2 years, before getting a transplant when a donor became available. And unfortunately, the transplant was successful, but due to complications shortly afterwards, she passed away. And so, unfortunately, there was not a happy ending to that story, but good came out of that, because Marilyn and Ken McKay were very vocal about the need for government support for Nova Scotians who have to travel out of province. And I was pleased when the former Minister of Health, the member from Argyll, did provide some funding, and then when the new government came in, the Minister of Health did announce a formal program to help Nova Scotians who have to travel outside of our province for medical treatment that's not available here. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it is important that we continue to speak to our loved ones, to find out what their wishes are. Tragedies will happen in many cases. I think, as the Minister pointed out, it's not everyone that would be a suitable donor, depending on how their life has come to an end, but still it's a discussion that we should all have with our family members and with our friends, so that should anything happen to them, that there is no confusion as to whether they wish to be a donor or not. I have no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that at one point in this legislature there will be legislation with an automatic assumption about donors. I have no doubt we are moving down that road at some point. We're not there yet, but I have no doubt that I'm sure during my lifetime I will see where it will be an automatic assumption in our province. But like I said, we're certainly not debating that today, but that'll be issues that will come before us, because I think some of the stats that the minister made available as to how many donations actually, how many transplants took place, those numbers are still very low, especially when I believe the minister indicated over 50% of Nova Scotians have indicated they wish to be donors on their health card. So there is more work to be done, but certainly anything that is going to move this forward and hopefully save lives for Nova Scotians is something we can support. I did take note of the remarks for the member for Cape Breton West with his own family experience, and I know home we had a recent tragedy not that long ago, and I saw one of the postings on the memorial site was from another family that had lost a child just a year earlier. And one of the things that they noted is that as difficult it was to have lost their child, they did take comfort in the fact that I believe it was 8 or 9 different families benefited from some of the organs and tissue that was donated as a result of that tragedy. So I think Nova Scotians certainly take comfort in hearing those stories, that some good can come out of these tragedies. Anything that we can do to get our numbers up and give Nova Scotians a second lease on life that bears out of tragic circumstances or loss of life is certainly something that we can all work towards supporting. So I do commend the minister for bringing this bill forward. I know I've been critical of some of the pieces of legislation, but certainly this one helps to balance out the bills that the government has brought out, because clearly this one will have a direct impact on the lives of some Nova Scotians, possibly even on families of members here in this chamber. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I again thank you for the opportunity to make a few remarks on third reading of this bill. Merci.
Thank you. Any further interveners on third reading? The question's been called on bill number 121. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill 121, an act respecting human organ and tissue donation.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 122, the Lobbyist Registration Act, and I move third reading.
Third reading, Bill number 122, the Lobbyist Registration Act. The question is being called. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 122, an act to amend Chapter 34 of the Acts of 2001, the Lobbyists Registration Act.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 123, Municipal Government Act, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter, excuse me, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading.
Third reading on Bill number 123, the Municipal Government Act, Halifax Regional Municipality Charter. Are you ready for the question? Question's been called. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 123, an act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, and Chapter 39 of the Acts of 2008, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 126, the Adult Learning Act, and I move third reading.
Bill number 126, the Adult Learning Act, third reading has been called. Are you ready for the question? Question's being called. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 126, an act respecting the Nova Scotia School for Adult Learning and other designated components of adult learning in Nova Scotia.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, with the indulgence of House, I wonder if I could revert to order of the daily routine to presenting reports of committees.
Absolutely. Is it agreed? Agreed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Could you please call reports committees of the law amendments?
Report of committees, report on law amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Vice Chair of the Law Amendments Committee, I'm directed to report that the committee has met and consider the following bills. Bill number 82, an act respecting the moratorium on petroleum activity on George's Bank. Bill number 124, an act respecting Nova Scotia land surveyors. Bill number 125, an act to amend Chapter 199 of the revised statutes 1989, the Heritage Property Act. Bill number 127, an act to amend Chapter 7 of the Acts of 1996, the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The committee recommends these bills to the favourable consideration of the House with certain amendments.
Order that these bills be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Vice Chairman of the Law Amendments Committee, I'm directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill number 128, an act to amend Chapter 475 of the revised statute 1989, the Trade Union Act, respecting powers and duties of the arbitrators and arbitration boards. The committee recommends this bill to the favourable consideration of the House without certain amendments.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, with the consent of the House, again, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask if we could go into Committee of the Whole House on Bills to consider the bills that were just reported back.
Is it agreed? Agreed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole House on Bills.
Motion carried.
The House will now recess for about 5 minutes. I'll call the Committee of the Whole House on Bills to order. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, could you please call Bill number 82, the Offshore Licensing Policy Act?
I recognize the Clerk.
Mr. Chair, this was reported back from the Law Amendments Committee with a fair number of changes. They have been distributed to all members in the chamber. So if you wish, I can read them, but if not. That's what, in that case, as it's been waived, just end by saying that it has 10 clauses.
Shall Clause 1 carry? Carry. Shall the remaining clauses carry? Carry. Shall the title carry? Carry. Shall the bill carry? Carry. The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, could you please call Bill number 124, the Land Surveyors Act?
I recognize the Clerk.
Mr. Chair, this was also reported back with amendments from the Law Amendments Committee. There are only 2 small ones. On page 12, subclause 27.3, in the second line, the words belong to the association have been deleted, and the words are payable to Her Majesty in right of the province have been substituted. And the last change is on page 12, subclause 28.1, in the second line, after the word judge have been added of the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia, and it has 78 clauses.
Shall Clause 1 carry? Carry. Shall the remaining clauses carry? Carry. Shall the title? Yeah. I recognize the member for Halifax, Chebucto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's an additional amendment to Bill 124. It's been circulated to members, I think, CWHB. It refers to page 22, clause 69. The Legislative Council's office discovered that a verb was missing in this paragraph, and with extreme care, the legislative drafter has now given us 5 verbs, I think, to add now: initiated, taken, carried out, made, or enforced before the word in, and I move that change.
Shall Clause 69 carry? Shall the remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Chair, could you please call Bill 125, the Heritage Property Act?
I recognize the Clerk.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Again, this was report. Oh, sorry.
Order. Yes.
This was reported back with a number.
So, I recognize the Clerk.
Mr. Chair, this was also reported back with a number of changes which are on a longer sheet that has been distributed to all the members. So if the committee wants to agree to dispense with the reading of them, then they won't. And that, if you ask for it, is it agreed?
Is that agreed? Is the House agreed?
In that case, I'll just finish by saying it has 19 clauses.
I recognize the member for Digby-Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sat in on law amendments this morning with the Nova Scotia Heritage Trust, and they brought something to my attention following the hearings this morning, and it was, and I would like to bring it up. It's Clause 2K on page 2 of the amendments. They would like to replace the word means in the second line by the words include. That's all they're asking for, and they wanted to know if I could bring this to the Committee of the Whole to see if this could happen. And this here would have the effect that substantial alteration would not be limited to any action that affects or alters the character defining element of a property. Substantial alteration could also include the plain meaning of the word substantial alteration. This This change would mean that the Act would continue to protect the exterior appearance of overall character of a property and not just eliminate of the property that happened to be mentioned in writing when the building was registered. And the new definition would then read, substantial alteration includes any action that affects or alters the character defining element of the property. And I'd also like to mention, Mr. Chairman, that the HRM, the Municipality of Halifax, is also in favor of changing this word. And with that, I will leave that. And there's something else I'd like to bring up too. I'd like to move that amendment first.
The motion before. I recognize the member for Chebucto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we're actually on that clause, I do wish to speak to the proposed amendment that the honourable member just put forward. I have to say that I think it's a very sensible amendment. I tended to agree with the points as submitted to us today. At the same time, the honourable member and members of the House or the committee will note that this doesn't come at this point with the endorsement of the government. The minister has not made this change. It's one of those unfortunate peculiarities of the timing pressure that does occur as bills go through the House, that the honourable minister was not able to consult with his department officials about this proposed change in order to bring it forward to the committee. I think it's appropriate that the minister be comfortable with the proposed change, and at the moment, not having been able to consult with his officials, it can't come forward with that endorsement. That said, this is not, one assumes, the only opportunity for this bill to be considered, or for this act to be considered for possible amendments, and I certainly hope that on a future occasion we'll all be able to turn our minds to this particular point that was raised, and indeed we heard other points this morning from the presenters, including HRM, so we do know that there are other points that will have to be raised in the future. Thank you very much.
Another bill for the spring, Howard. One clause bill for the spring.
I recognize the member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and respectfully, while the department may not have had the chance to look at it, of course, this is, we are 52 members of the legislature who are elected to make these decisions. The government obviously did come forward with its recommendations. The honourable member for Digby-Annapolis has made a suggestion based on what we heard from law amendments, and I mean, obviously, it's the government's interest to get the bills through today, so there isn't that time, and of course that's the risk you take when you decide that you want to get it through law amendments and all the different processes on the same day. It means that the legislature has to make decisions in its infinite wisdom, and I'm sure that the members of the government can take a free vote on this matter.
I recognize the member for Digby-Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe we could hold this bill over for a few moments while the minister worked with his staff to see if this is okay.
There we go. Good suggestion. Good suggestion. Good member.
I recognize the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, with all due respect, I just came in off the telephone now, trying to make contact with my staff ever since I just met with Mr. Pacey outside. So I've been doing due diligence with respect to this without any success, Mr. Speaker. Taking into consideration the time, the hour, the day, and I've even tried cell phone. So I have made that effort. The suggestion may have merit, Mr. Speaker. That merit is not going to diminish any time over the next number of days, weeks, or months, whatever. This is something that we can revisit and that we're open to that, but I'm not prepared at this time to move forward with the amendment without proper consultation with staff.
I recognize the member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And my concern about leaving this aside for another day is that it won't come back here for a very long time. This is a single word change that's makes sense. We're looking at the bill today, and we've not had the Heritage Act here before us in a long time. I can't imagine the government bringing it back later with just a single word change. It's just, it's a small change. I feel like, surely there are other things that are going to be taking the minister's attention, and this is the time when he's looking and his staff are looking at the Heritage Act, and it's the opportunity to do it in the best way we can today. I know our staff have been out there looking at amendments and reacting quickly to the changes. Again, this being the last day or two of the House, things move very quickly, and that's often when errors are made, when we're trying to move along very, very fast and not take that little moment to just consider something. And we've had a chance to look at it, and we think that there's nobody in the province that understands the heritage situation better than Heritage Trust. They are people who have been advocating and working on the best interests of Nova Scotians, trying to keep our built heritage and the other elements of heritage in our province. And I think that we would be in good hands to follow their advice and move this one small amendment. Maybe I could ask Mr. Chair whether or not there's an opportunity on third reading if the minister has a chance to hear back. Perhaps we could, move this through committee of the whole. I understand there is a mechanism to make changes on third reading. Maybe the clerk could clarify, but I was told recently you can propose a change on third reading.
I recognize the clerk.
The normal procedure would be to move under Rule 51 immediately upon the calling of the orders of the day for third reading to recommit the bill to the Committee of the Whole House so that it could make the change at that time.
So that can't be done now then? Yes, it still could when it's called third reading. We're in Committee of the Whole now.
No, upon the calling for third reading, before it is moved, a motion can be made
to revert
be recommitted.
Back. All right. Well, I mean, perhaps members of the House will consider that, because the minister, I'm sure, it's not a substantial, huge change. So if the minister just has the opportunity to speak to staff, I think that will cause all of this, uncertainty to disappear. So I'd like to suggest that to the House. Thank you.
I have to do the motion, right? Yeah. The motion before the House is, I recognize the member for Preston.
This amendment is a very small amendment, and I know the minister, being a minister in the past, can make a decision here in the House without contacting the staff, and I'm surprised the staff hasn't called him back already, because typically when you're a minister, your staff calls you back immediately. And the honourable member from Halifax-Chebucto and the one from Digby make very good points, and I think it'd be a shame to push this bill through when we can wait just a few minutes, maybe just set this bill aside and put it down further on the order paper until the minister does have time to hear back from the staff and see if it's okay with them to move forward with the bill.
Before considering an amendment to the clause, I want to proceed with the bill and ask the House, shall clause 1 carry? The motion before the House is an amendment to the clause presented by the member for Digby Annapolis as returned from law amendments. Shall that amendment pass? Yes. No. Okay. The amendment is not carried. Shall the remaining clauses carry? Carry. Shall the title? I recognize the member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is one additional change, page 3, clause 5. Certain changes in explanation, certain changes were made, and the change sheet has been circulated. Certain changes were made to add the term public building interior and cultural landscape in various places in the Act, but it was inadvertently omitted from subsection 7.5, and this amendment that's in front of the committee at the moment would be to add it to section 7 subsection 5 so as to be completely consistent throughout the revised bill. Thank you. I make that motion.
The motion before the House is for an amendment to clause 5. All those in favour of the motion? Aye. Contrary minded? Motion passed. Shall the remaining clauses carry? Carry. Shall the title carry? Carry. Shall the bill carry? Carry. The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you please call Bill 127, the Occupational Health and Safety Act?
I recognize the clerk.
Again, this was referred back with changes from the Law Amendments Committee. There's one small change on page 4, clause 18. The clause is to be deleted and the following clause substituted. 18, section 84 of chapter 7 is repealed. It has 19 clauses.
Shall clause 1 carry?
Carried.
Shall the amendment, the clause 18, carry?
Carried.
Shall the remaining clauses carry?
Carried.
Shall the title carry?
Carried.
Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you please call Bill 128, the Trade Union Act?
I recognize the clerk.
Mr. Chair, this was reported back from Law Amendments Committee without amendments, and it has 4 clauses.
Shall clause 1 carry?
Carried.
Shall the remaining I recognize the member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to take a minute to speak to Bill 128. Just a couple of things of concern with regards to the arbitration and how that's all decided and awards being done. Now, if I read it right, it appears as though the arbitrator has a job to do, and that's fine. His job has always been is to bring the two parties together and recommend reconciliation and get through that and come to an agreement. However, I do take some issue with the agreement being made and the arbitrator perhaps not feeling that's good enough one way or the other and then stepping up and making a change to that. It kind of overrules everything that's the whole purpose of the arbitrator to begin with. He might as well have had no panel. The arbitrator solely walk in by himself without hearing any parties or any discussion and solely make an award based on whatever he or she feels is the flavor of the day, basically, is what it comes down to. So just wanted to express that concern, Mr. Chair, that I do have a concern with that piece and that the arbitrator does have a role, but it is not to overstep its bounds and make awards because he or she may not like what has been decided by the two parties at the table. So with those few words, I'll take my seat. Thank you.
Thank the honourable member for those comments. We'll now proceed with Bill 128. Shall clause 1 carry? Carry. Shall the remaining clauses carry? Carry. Shall the title carry? Carry. Shall the bill carry? Carry. The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Chair, I wish the committee to now rise and report progress.
Motion before the House is to report progress.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on Bills reports
that the Committee of the Whole has met and considered the following bills. Bill 128 without amendments, Bills 82 and 127, which were reported with certain amendments by the Committee on Law Amendments to the Committee of the Whole without further amendments, and Bills 124 and 125, which were reported with certain amendments by the Committee on Law Amendments with certain further amendments, and the Chairman has been instructed to recommend that these bills to the favourable consideration of the House.
Order these bills be read a third time on a future day. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, I would like to ask the House for consent to deal with these bills that just been reverted back from Committee of the Whole for third reading.
Is it agreed? Agreed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move third reading of Bill number 82.
Third reading of Bill number 82. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to very briefly speak to this, and perhaps I'm not sure the member of Digby-Annapolis may wish to as well. From the very first day, both the member for Digby-Annapolis and I had expressed concerns about the way that this bill was written and shared the concerns of no rigs and no rigs 3, I think they're at the moment, and the Ecology Action Centre on this, and I'm glad that in the last dying days of this bill that the Department of Energy has agreed to changes in the bill, largely reflecting the position that we've taken from the very beginning, and certainly the position that the No Rigs 3 took at the press briefing as well. So we certainly feel that this makes the bill stronger, and we're while we indicated during second reading we were happy to support the bill at that time, we did feel that it really was not strong enough, and the only reason we were going to support it at that point was because it was a step forward. At least it wasn't a step backwards. But now I think it more adequately reflects the concerns that we raised at the beginning, and I would like to thank the Minister. I'd like to thank the Minister and his department for giving consideration to those amendments and working with those organizations and keeping the opposition and members in the loop as well as he considered the suggestions we put forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I'll recognize the Honourable Member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I too want to speak just for a couple of moments on Bill 82. Of course, the issue that was quickly brought to us after the release of the Offshore Act was the issue of it was felt to be a tad weak on what constituted a review and how government and not this government, because I know the intention of this government and the intention of this legislature is to protect what happens on Georges Bank, to make sure that it is there for the fishery, for the growth of fish in that area, for the growth of the fishing industry in Nova Scotia. If we allow drilling and exploration to happen within that area, I do believe that we will be throwing out one of the best resources that we possibly have in our ecosystem. It's a tremendous opportunity for all of us, and it was a tremendous opportunity for us to support the banning of oil exploration on that bank. As I said before, in second reading, I had talked about having the opportunity to visit other jurisdictions and what they would qualify as being a closed area. And that's exactly what we do. The intention of the bill is to create a closed area on Georges Bank to make sure that it is there for generations to come. No Rigs 3, of course, after the release and what I had said at that time, I felt it was weak on what constituted to go back and review and to allow. They took that back. They had their lawyers look at it. They felt there was a number of things that needed to be tightened up. And I thank the Minister and I thank the government for listening to those issues and making this bill a better bill than what it was when it first came into this House. So consultation worked in this instance, and we thank the government for that.
Thank you. I'll recognize the Honourable Member for Digby-Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too want to rise in my place and speak on this bill today. And I want to thank the Minister for all the changes he's made of it. And just last night, I was home after the House here, and I watched Dock Zone on CBC television, Dock Zone, and spoke about the possible oil spills in the Atlantic waters and the cold waters. And it would look, if something like that ever happened in these cold waters off of this coast, it would make the Gulf of Mexico look like a picnic because of the cold water, the oil that would come out of the ground, and it wouldn't even start to come to the surface so you could try to clean it up. It would pave all the fishing grounds of Atlantic Canada. That's what it would do, pave them. So, I mean, this is something we serious. This gives us another 10 years to look at this, to 2022. And I want to thank the minister very much for holding off a little longer on this. It's a real good move. And maybe in 10 or 12 years, we can take another review of this and maybe look at it again. But at least it'll give the fishing industry some relief that they haven't got to go fight another battle about drilling on this sensitive bank here on our coast. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you very much, and I want to wish everybody Merry Christmas too, because I may not get up again and speak today or this year. So, but anyway, Merry Christmas, each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable member. Are you ready for the question? The question's been called for third reading on Bill 82. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 82, an act respecting a moratorium on petroleum activity on George's Bank.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. I'll recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move third reading of Bill number 124.
Third reading of Bill number 124. The question's been called. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 124, an act respecting Nova Scotia land surveyors.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 127, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and I move third reading.
Bill number 127, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, third reading. Are you ready for the question? The question's been called. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 127, an act to amend Chapter 7 of the Acts of 1996, the Occupational Health and Safety Act.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, be calling Bill number 125, the Heritage Property Act, for third reading. And I'll just say this, Mr. Speaker. In committee of the whole, there was amendments proposed by the member from Digby, Annapolis, and that we were having some difficulty getting everybody together at this short time. But what I will give the House my word that those words appropriate to what he's put forward will be dealt with in regulation. With that, Mr. Speaker, I move third reading of Bill 125.
Third reading has been called on the Heritage Property Act, Bill number 125. Are you ready for the question? Question. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 125, an act to amend Chapter 199 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Heritage Property Act.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, days like this, I'm glad my last name isn't McClellan. He is too, I guess. Probably more so. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 128, the Trade Union Act, and I move third reading.
Bill number 128, the Trade Union Act, third reading has been called. Are you ready for the question? The question's been called. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 128, an act to amend Chapter 475 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Trade Union Act, respecting powers and duties of arbitrators and arbitration boards.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, that will complete most of our business for the day. I would like to take a short recess, and we'll be getting back to, and we'll call it back maybe 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes.
We'll take a short recess. The Government House Leader.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that completes the government's legislative agenda. So I would wish that the House would recess for a time while we contact Her Honour to assent the bills, and I think we're looking at an area of about 3 p.m. We will notify the whips, and they will notify their respective caucuses. So with that, we do recess.
Okay, thank you. We'll be recessed till approximately 3 p.m.